Welcome WPN members, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Today, we are continuing our webinar series with a much requested topic, Financial Aid 101 for support staff. Our presenters today are our own financial aid experts from CSF's College Services, Maria Rebecchi and Carrie Moss. But before I hand it over to them for introductions, I want to quickly go over a couple of housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our WPN website. So if you need to rewatch it at a later time, or if you have colleagues that are unable to attend today, we'll go ahead and upload that after this meeting, and we'll be sure to link it in our next WPN newsletter. And if you have questions, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, and we'll be using the chat function. But go ahead and drop your questions at any time, and we'll be sure to field the questions over to the presenters at the end. And we'll also have a few announcements and updates at the end, so stay tuned for those. But now let's go ahead and welcome today's presenters and let them introduce themselves. Welcome, Maria and Carrie.
Thank you, Aussie, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for an introduction or a refresher of the basics of financial aid. As Aussie mentioned, I'm Maria Rebecchi, and I'm the Director of Scholarships and Financial Aid Education here at CSF, where I've been doing this work for almost 9 years, but I have been in the field of financial aid for over 30. So I'm very happy to be able to share the knowledge I have gained over the years. And I would like to invite my colleague, Carrie, to introduce herself briefly before we go on.
Thank you, Maria. My name is Carrie Moss. I am a program officer here at CSF, and I currently oversee the BECU Foundation Scholarship, Governor's Scholarship for Foster Youth, as well as the MLK Scholarship. And prior to joining CSF, I was a financial aid advisor here in Washington State at 2 different community and technical colleges. I'm very happy that you guys are taking the time to join us today, and I'm looking forward to giving you as much knowledge as possible to help our student population. Please feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat. We will answer them at the end.
Thank you, Carrie. So just a little plug. I know that the WPN team has a website, but also wanted to make you aware, in case you didn't know, that in the CSF website, there is a financial aid portal. We have a section geared towards students and their supporting adults, and another one for practitioners like you on a wide range of financial aid topics. I think we have 8 different topics. We have many of our presentations, both in English and Spanish. And we also have tools and resources that we have either created or vetted. I will tell you that if you go now to the website, you may find some presentations that are labeled for the prior year, 23-24, and that's because we are working very hard right now to create or finalize the 24-25 year presentation. So bear with us, and we'll have everything updated very, very soon. So without further ado, let's get started with the goals for today. So it will be, as I mentioned, a refresher, or for those of you that are new, an opportunity to learn about the different types of financial aid available to students. We hope to explain how students access financial aid resources, right? How do they manage to get awarded these different types that are available to them. Also understand how financial aid offices go through the process of determining what type and what amount of financial aid the student qualifies for, and then how this aid is awarded and distributed. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers. Okay, so I know that some of you, when you registered for this webinar, had a couple of questions. So we wanted to start with some very basic definitions so that we all get on the same page. So when we talk about dependent students, we refer to those students that are financially and legally dependent on their biological or adopted parents. And it's very important to remember that we, for FAFSA and WASFA purposes, the dependent definition only considers a parent those that are biological or adopted parents, okay? No foster parents, no other family members, not even those in legal guardianships. So they're just referring to biological or adopted. Independent, on the other hand, are those students that are financially and legally responsible for themselves. So there's no other adult that they would have to provide information for in their FAFSA or WASFA, unless they are married and they would have to provide information about their spouse. Now, I'm not going to read the whole definition for a youth that is experiencing homelessness, but very important keywords for you to remember. So how a student gets considered under this circumstance is when they lack, when they do not have a fixed, regular, or adequate housing. And this is a temporary arrangement, right? So there, again, the fixed versus temporary is very important, right? So those are the kind of definitions that those that make this assessment are looking for. An accompanied minor is a student who is not living under the physical custody of a parent or a guardian. So here differs a little bit from the definition of dependent in terms of who would be responsible in a way or looking after the student, right? So an accompanied minor is a student who is not living in the physical custody of their parent or another adult, right, or another guardian. Okay, so to give you an example, this could be a young person who is, for example, crossing the border into the United States by themselves without an adult. They would be considered unaccompanied minors. The McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act is pretty much a law that provides educational rights and services to any student in the pre-K through 12 pathway, right, that are experiencing homelessness. So McKinney-Vento is very common to be used interchangeably with homeless youth, right? And people think that these are two separate definitions, but it's really the same, right? Homeless youth would qualify as such under the McKinney-Vento Act. And you may or may not know, but most school districts, if not schools themselves, have a McKinney-Vento liaison who does the assessment if the student falls under this category and certifies the student as such. So if you have a student under these circumstances and you need that certification maybe to complete a FAFSA or WASFA to access any sort of supports and services, you would do that through the McKinney-Vento liaison or staff member at their high school or at the district level. Okay, so I hope that this has provided a little bit of clarification on these terms that sometimes can be confusing. And I think that Carrie is going to drop actually a link on the chat where you can get a little bit more information on the McKinney-Vento Act.
Thanks so much, Maria. The link that I dropped is to Schoolhouse Connection, and they are an abundant resource for unaccompanied youth, homeless youth, and resources that are available to them. And they also go in depth with the definition. So if you ever want to pop onto one of their webinars, they are amazing. For myself, in the next slide, I'm going to go over the different types of financial aid. So there are so many different types of sources for financial aid, and they can often become overwhelming and confusing for students to determine what they've been awarded by their schools. But the easiest way to break it down is that there's 3 different buckets. There's free money, borrowed money, and there's earned money. Free money would be financial aid that's comprised of grants and scholarships, whereas borrowed money would be loans, and also an additional type of financial aid that students may be offered And lastly, there's earned money, which is known as work study, and that's the last type of aid. So we'll break down in the next few slides the different types of free money, borrowed money, and earned money that students may be eligible for. Next slide, please. When supporting students in their financial aid application process, students must know the various sources of where their financial aid can come from and how to apply for them. And we also want them to understand key features of these different types of aid. Grants come from federal, state, and institutional sources. This is the free aid that's often either need-based or merit-based. And like scholarships, grants do not need to be repaid. To apply for grants, students have to fill out a FAFSA or a WASFA, and they may require additional forms from the financial aid office. The other free aid is scholarships, and there are national, state, institutional, as well as nonprofit and private scholarships available for students. An important feature to look at when students are applying for scholarships is to ensure that the scholarship applications do not ask for the students to pay, because that's a very big red flag that it's a scam. And we want to make sure that students are aware of this and steer clear of any fraudulent or untrustworthy scholarship sources. When applying for scholarships, students should ask their scholarship providers for if they're renewable or transferable. So a renewable scholarship means that they can renew it year to year for subsequent years, and transferable refers to a feature that allows students to take their scholarship with them when they transfer to a different school or if they change majors. And also, depending on the school, they may call transferable scholarships portable scholarships. Another type of free aid is work study, and that's an aid where the student gets to work on campus or off campus, as well with some work study opportunities. They could work at a nonprofit or a state agency, and students do have to demonstrate financial need, but these funds don't have to be repaid. Students must work hours in order to earn work-study funds. So unlike other types of aids, students do need to find a job and they need to work their hours and then they get paid. Students must complete a FAFSA or a WASFA to be considered for work-study. One thing to keep in mind is that work-study earnings are not considered when calculating a student's financial need for the following year, so this can help them maintain or even increase their eligibility for need-based aid. Second, work-study jobs are often flexible and tailored to accommodate students' academic schedule, so it makes it easier for them to balance their school and work. Finally, participating in work-study programs can provide students with amazing networking experiences and valuable work experience that can really benefit them in the future. Lastly, loans are the last type of available aid, and it is the least recommended. Loans represent debt and money that students will need to repay with interest. Borrowing a little bit from a good loan program can be an investment in oneself, but we need to ensure that it's done in an educated and responsible manner. And by this, I mean, as practitioners, we need to understand the fine print and do the math to ensure students make decisions that allow them to be financially healthy at the end of their college years. So let's take a deeper look into each one of these programs.
Okay, before I move the slide, I wanted to make a comment. I am sorry to the audience that unfortunately I started typing, we started posting the links and responding to some of your questions, but we are a panelist and we can't, you can't see our responses, so we'll address them all at the end. Okay, so don't worry about it, and we can send them in an email afterwards if you have to leave the webinar early. Sorry, Carrie, thank you.
No worries. The next 6 slides cover in depth all the different types of aid that are available. It is heavy content, so we will point out some of the most important items of each one of them, but we do recommend that you spend time learning and familiarizing yourself with each one. So what's important for you and students to know is that as long as students qualify, these different sources of aid can be stacked upon one another. So what that means is Let's say a student qualifies for Pell Grant. They can also qualify for FSEOG and other programs. So students can receive more than just one of these sources, as you can see on the screen. Pell Grant is the oldest and largest federal need-based program. It's the proxy for low income, and students can apply on the very last day of the academic year and still receive it, which means that these funds don't run out. And FSEOG comes next, and it's reserved for students with the highest need. SAI is Student Aid Index, and their SAI is between negative 1,500 and 0. And although the current max award is about 4,000, we hardly ever see students get that much. And that's because these funds are allocated by campus, which means that campuses have to decide how to distribute them, and they do run out, unlike Pell Grant that does not run out. And then there's ETVs. So these are grants funded by the federal government and administered by states, and they're awarded to eligible current and former foster youth to help pay for college and career school and training. In the next slide, we will discuss the College Bound Scholarship. It's an early commitment of state financial aid to eligible students who enroll in middle school and meet the pledge requirements. The College Bound Scholarship covers average tuition at public college rates, some fees, and a small book allowance at over 65 colleges, universities, and technical schools within Washington. What's nice about College Bound is that students are automatically enrolled. And as part of the College Bound Scholarship sign-up process, they pledge the following: to graduate a Washington State high school or approved homeschool program with a cumulative GPA of 2.0 or higher. However, what's also nice is that at the beginning of fall 2023, the GPA requirement for students going to a community or technical colleges, it's no longer there. Students cannot have a felony conviction, and they need to apply for financial aid, so FAFSA or WASFA application beginning their senior year. The way that funding works is typically a family of 4 making about $73,000 or less would receive the full award. And if a family of 4 is making about $112,000 or less, they would receive partial awards. For example, public college tuition would likely be free for a family with 3 children and a single parent making about $25 an hour. And for middle income families, grants are a little bit lower, but even someone from a family of 4 making $112,000 a year, they can get some money to help pay for college, which would of course be stacked on top of Pell. There is the Washington College Grant as well, and it's one of the most generous financial aid programs in the country. Recent high school graduates and working age adults from many low and middle income families can qualify to receive money for college or career training. And in the next slide, we will discuss work study.
Harry, I'm going to address very quickly a question that is in the chat. The question is regarding to College Bound. The question is, can students who take a break from high school and come back to finish their diploma later qualify for College Bound as long as they meet the other requirements? They can. They can.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Work study programs are a type of federal financial aid that allows undergraduate and graduate students with financial need to earn money through part-time employment while they're enrolled in school. So during the summer, what's nice is that students can work full-time, and then during the rest of the year, they will be working part-time. And these programs are designed to help students cover their educational expenses and gain valuable work experience at the same time. And these jobs can be on campus or off campus. If it's on campus, students will usually work for the school. And if they work off campus, the employer is typically a state or federal agency or a nonprofit organization. In the next slide, we're going to discuss Passport to Careers program. It helps former foster youth and unaccompanied youth prepare for and succeed in college, as well as apprenticeships or pre-apprenticeship programs. Passport to Careers includes two subgroups. There's Passport to College program, as well as Passport to Apprenticeship opportunities. So through Passport to College, students get a scholarship and support services from college staff. Funds can be used for tuition and fees, as well as books, housing, transportation, and some personal expenses. For Passport to Apprenticeship opportunities, it helps support people in registered apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship programs, and the funds can cover tuition and fees for classes and occupational costs like work or clothes, as well as tools. And we also have the Supplemental Education Transition Program known as SETUP. And it also supports the same community of students to transition from high school to college or career service. There is a link that I'll have Maria drop in the chat for WASAC. And first SETUP, a student is eligible if they're in foster care in Washington State or experiencing homelessness without a parent or guardian. They do have to be between the ages of 13 to 21 and enrolled in high school or a GED program. And in the next slide, we'll discuss borrowed money. Loans. Oh, loans. So a loan is, yeah,
Sorry.
it's okay. A loan is money students borrow and they have to pay back with interest. So it's important for students to understand this, and not all student loans are created equal. So it is true that borrowing is an investment in your future, but it's also true that if the source of funding is one that keeps a student financially, that we want to make sure it's one that keeps the student financially whole. And in this section, we'll describe the different types of student loans and their features and the considerations to be had before signing the dotted line. So with federal loans, the first loan is a direct subsidized loan. Excuse me. And those loans are for undergraduate students who demonstrate financial need to help cover the cost of higher education. And it's like an interest-free loan. So while the student is in school, right, it's important, while the student is in school, there is no interest accruing. But once the student is no longer enrolled, then the interest kicks in. So this type of loan is often the most affordable way to borrow. The next loan, federal loan, is the direct unsubsidized loan. And those loans are made eligible to undergraduate as well as graduate and professional students. But eligibility is not based on financial need, and interest starts accruing with the first disbursement. So that means that while the student is in school, interest is accumulating. There's also something called a Direct Plus loan, and those loans are made to graduate or professional students and parents of a dependent undergrad student to help pay for educational expenses that are not covered by other financial aid. So the difference between a plus loan and an unsubsidized loan, the eligibility is not based upon financial need, but a credit check is required. So it's very important for families to understand that this type of aid is not guaranteed, even if listed or offered on a student's financial aid letter. And it has the highest interest rate out of all of the loans. And the interest will accrue while the student is in school, and the repayment starts immediately while they're in school. They can apply for a deferment, but if you're working with a student, please have this be a last case scenario for them to apply for. So these are the types of financial aid sources that can be used to cover the student aid index. And some merit-based scholarships may also allow using it to cover the SAI, but please check with a scholarship provider.
One additional thing, Carrie, before we move on to the next slide. Yes, we have a typo in the presentation. The new maximum award for passport is 2,800, down from 4,500. So I apologize for that. Before we send the PowerPoint, we'll make sure to update it.
Thank you. All right, next we're going to go into private loans. Private student loans can help make ends meet while pursuing higher ed. However, they should be a last resort as well. A private loan could be from, your local bank or a private lender that specifically is for higher education, but we only recommend this after exhausting all other financial aid and maximizing all other federal student loans available. Because unlike federal student loans, private loans, they don't offer standard repayment plans, and the interest rates are really, really high. The student's credit and that of a cosigner, if the student requires one, will be affected. And also, depending on their credit, that will affect what type of loan they can qualify for and the student loan interest that they'll receive. So if you would like more information on private loans, we have a link for you. But Maria, did you say that the links that we're dropping are not popping up?
They are not popping. I'm having Osi or Laura actually resharing the link.
Thank you,
So
guys.
yeah.
Thank
So
you.
let me put it there and ask Laura or Osi to please share those links with the rest of the participants.
Thank
Okay.
you.
No, thank you. Okay, so now let's talk about how students go about accessing all this money that Carrie just described very clearly. Thank you, Carrie, for that. So students start the process by completing either a FAFSA or a WASFA, right? These forms, these financial aid forms are sort of the key that unlock all the different types of financial aid. So they complete one of these two forms, which not only are important to unlock, right? But it's a way to kind of let the school know. So as you know, in these financial aid forms, students can list up to 20 different colleges and universities where they are considering attending. So when the school receives a FAFSA or a WASFA, it's a sign for them that the student is considering attending and that they will need financial aid. The importance of this form also is that it calculates the student aid index. The student aid index, or SAI, is now replacing the old EFC, or expected family contribution. In theory, or in its concept, is sort of the same. It pretty much gives financial aid offices an idea of the financial health of the student and their family, right? So that they can use that number to determine what type and amount of financial aid the student needs and qualifies for, right? The formula has changed with FAFSA simplification, but pretty much looks at student and any adult that is included in the form that they're now called contributors. So it looks at their income, their assets, how many individuals in the household, how many individuals in the household will be attending college. The age of the oldest parent is also taken into account, because the closer the parent is to retirement, the lower the SAI is going to be in theory, right? Because if they are going to be retiring, they're probably not going to have enough money to contribute towards their student education, and the reverse is also true. So if the parent is far away from retiring, they're going to be, quote unquote, expected to be able to contribute towards their student education more than if they were older. So the student completes either one of these forms and they submit them to the financial aid office with any additional documentation that the financial aid office may need. The results of the FAFSA or the WASFA, right? The student, now I'm blanking on the new term, but sort of the old student aid report. So the summary that gets created after the student submits their FAFSA or their WASFA, it's also going to spell out the next steps for the student in terms of what else they need to do. So if they have been selected for the process called verification, and these cover letters, if you want, with these reports, is going to state that. But it's also very important that students follow up with the financial aid office, because each financial aid office may have different deadlines, different processes, additional paperwork the student will need to complete in order for the financial aid office to determine what they qualify for and to develop a financial aid award letter, which is a document that is very important for us to sit down and help the student understand what that letter is. And just like with loans, financial aid award letters are not created equal. They are all very different. So it's very difficult for students to compare those award letters because they don't contain all the information necessary and they vary greatly, right? So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but let me talk next. Oh, sorry, what else do I have here? Sorry. Oh, yes, I mentioned that. And the FAFSA and WASFA open on December 1st this year. FAFSA is going through a beta process right now, and we have heard that it has opened still in this beta period, so anybody could potentially go and start with the application. What we have also heard is that they're still tweaking some things. So the recommendation, although it's not written anywhere, we heard it in a call that we were sitting at earlier this week, is that maybe it's better to wait until December 9th before you encourage students to complete their FAFSA. WASFA for sure will not open until after December 1st because they need to see exactly what's happening with the FAFSA to make those, to reflect those changes on the WASFA. Okay, so you're sitting with a student and they're like, which one of these two forms am I going to complete? So as I mentioned, the first step to prepare to pay for college is applying for either one of these forms. And these forms are, again, the key to unlocking all types of financial aid. Applying for these financial aid applications is very critical, right? As the school is going to communicate with the student what other steps they need to take. Now, it's very important to remember that there is an or in the middle of this slide, right? Students only complete one, not both. So students who can answer yes to all of the questions that are presented in the FAFSA, sorry, not presented in the FAFSA. Any student that can answer yes to any one of these items, right, eligibility criteria, complete a FAFSA. So U.S. citizens, U.S. nationals, or anybody born in American Samoa or Swain Islands, any permanent residents, so anybody with a green card, anybody with an I-94 form, which is pretty much a card that is not bigger than my hand, that some individuals get when they reach a port of entry into the United States, which usually gets stamped with, a status of refugee or asylum granted, or Cuban Haitian entrant, conditional entrant parolee. Usually these statuses are a permission to come into the country, but there are additional steps with the immigration system that the individual needs to go through before they gain permanent residency or at least some sort of status that would give them access to supports and resources like financial aid. But if they have that I-94, they can complete a FAFSA. Then anybody that obtained their visa, meaning their permanent residency under the VAWA program, VAWA stands for Violence Against Women's Act. They also qualify for a FAFSA, and anybody with a T or T1 visa, they would also, which is human trafficking visa. So anybody that can say yes to anyone or that fits within any one of these categories, they would fill out a FAFSA. Now, who qualifies for a WASFA? So any undocumented student, even those with DACA, even if DACA is expired, they can complete a WASFA. Other non-citizens, and that is something that you may want to encourage the student to check with the admissions office or the financial aid office at their school, because that definition of non-citizen is very wide and varies from school to school. Any student that may have defaulted on a federal loan or grant, and that makes them ineligible for federal aid, they may want to skip the federal form, maybe for other reasons. Maybe they don't want to complete a federal form. They can complete a WASFA. Students who don't feel safe or comfortable completing a FAFSA, and I expect that just like in 2016, we're going to see a large number of students fitting this category this year. Even students that would otherwise qualify for a FAFSA. Now, FAFSA requires that students with undocumented parents include that information in the form, and we're hearing more and more from students that they themselves or their families do not feel comfortable doing that. They can complete the WASFA, even if they are U.S. citizens or permanent residents. The only thing they need to know is that they're going to forego any form of federal aid, but they're probably filling out a WASFA is going to provide a level of safety that a FAFSA will not. And then there may be other reasons why students may choose to complete a WASFA instead of a FAFSA. So they can do that too. One thing to mention, and although this is kind of old information, but I think it's important to know because I saw a question on the chat. Since July of 2021, there is a new law, old now, but it was the old Senate Bill 5194 that made it easier for all Washingtonians, including and especially undocumented students and accompanying minors, to meet residency requirements for in-state tuition and in-state financial aid. And the requirement is that an applicant may have received their high school diploma or equivalent anywhere. So in the past, there was a requirement that it had to be in the state of Washington. Now it doesn't matter where. They can have, receive it anywhere in the world. The other one is that the law now only requires a person to have lived in Washington state for a year prior to enrolling in college, right? To gain that in-state residency and in-state eligibility for aid. So they have really flexed the requirements, making, a larger number of students to qualify for in-state tuition and in-state financial aid. So this is what we have for completing the application. Now let's go and see what is the first step to complete these forms. So I'm going to talk first about FAFSA. Where does a student begin? The important thing is for a student, and if they have a contributor, like a biological or adopted parent only, to get an FSA ID, which is pretty much a username and a password, which is the electronic signature that a student and their contributors, if it applies to them, will use to sign into the FAFSA and then to sign it right before they submit it. What number should they use to get this FSA ID? They will have to use their social security number. And if the contributor doesn't have a social security number, they can still get an FSA ID. They will go through an electronic affidavit to verify their identity, which is usually done through one of the 3 credit bureaus, sorry, and I'm blanking on the name at the moment, TransUnion. So it's a process that happens at the same time that the contributor is getting their FSA ID. So again, biological or adopted parent will need to get an FSA ID if the student is completing a FAFSA. Now for the WASFA, this is the link to go and open an account. So the account is the equivalent of the FAFSA FSA ID. Who needs an account? Just like with the FAFSA, the student and their contributor, if they have a contributor, right? And again, the contributor is a biological or adopted parent only. What numbers do they use to start their account? If they have a social security number that they may have obtained through their DACA application, for example, they can do that. Or if they're US citizens or permanent residents deciding to complete a WASFA, they will use that number. They can use also their DACA number or their ITIN, which is the equivalent of a social security number for undocumented individuals. How do you distinguish an ITIN from social security numbers? ITINs start with the number 9. Just a little piece of information for you there. If they don't have any numbers, they can leave it blank, and the WASFA application will assign them a random number. A couple of tips for you. The student, and if they have a parent contributor, will need to use different email addresses and phone numbers to create their FSA ID or their WASFA account. And that is because these are part of what differentiates them from any other application, any other FSA ID or account, right? They use them as identifiers together with the social security number. Also, if the contributor has multiple children for whom they have completed a FAFSA or a WASFA in the past, or if they have been students themselves and have in the past completed a FAFSA or a WASFA, they're going to use the same FSA ID or account. They don't need to create a new one because remember, you only have one social security number, right? So, or email address, right? And phone number. So if they have one in the past, but they don't remember their login or password, they will have to reset it, but they are not going to be allowed to create a new one. And I think I have one more tip for you. Yes, make sure that all information that is entered when they are completing their FSA ID or their WASFA account matches and it's correct, because making corrections to those basic information, all those pieces of information can be very time consuming and complicated, and you may have to call, the FSA toll free line, and that can be frustrating. So let's make sure that they do it right the first time. Oh, before I forget, this is a new feature that was instituted last year. All contributors, students, and any parent that may be a contributor will have to provide consent. And the consent is pretty much consenting the Department of Ed to transfer financial data from the IRS. If there is no consent, there is no transfer of data, and there is no financial aid for the student. It's true that students and contributors can enter by hand their financial information, but consent still needs to be granted. Okay.
Thank you, Maria. I see that we have about 15 minutes left. I will talk a little bit quicker than I was before. I want to ensure that we have time for questions, but this may run a little bit over.
Yeah.
So we've talked about types of financial aid and how to apply for financial aid. Now we're going to talk about how financial aid is dispersed at a school and everything that goes into it. So we're going to talk about cost of attendance, and that is the estimated annual cost of attending a particular college or university. So typically when discussing cost of attending a college or university, it's important to consider all of the costs that are incurred by attending that school. So this is known as cost of attendance, or COA, and it includes tuition and fees, books, supplies, housing, food, transportation, and any miscellaneous items. So some costs that is affected cost is affected by many variables. It could be affected by the type of institution, and if the student is attending a public or private school versus a 2-year, 4-year, or trade school. All of these types of institutions have varied costs, and the type of school that the student is attending will determine the total cost of attendance. Housing plans, those also impact your cost of attendance. So if a student is living on campus versus off campus, or if they're living with a guardian or a family member, that will change their cost of attendance. Another item that impacts cost of attendance is your residency status. That impacts your tuition cost as well. And when we're discussing residency, I want to clarify that we are not talking about immigration status. We are talking about the length of time a student has lived in the state of Washington. So this is why when a student attends an out-of-state public institution, the tuition costs are higher and in-state aid is not available to most of them. However, most colleges and universities require a student to live in state for about 1 year or more in order to establish residency. And lastly, costs are dependent on how many credits a student is taking and based on how many classes you are enrolled in. So next we'll do an overview of cost of attendance.
I'm going to do very quick and I'm going to skip a lot of slides, okay? Very quickly, let's do this one.
Let's do it. Alrighty, so SAI stands for Student Aid Index. Student Aid Index was previously EFC, Expected Family Contribution, okay? So how financial aid offices determine financial need is with this formula. They take the total cost of attendance for the year and they subtract it from the student's SAI, okay? And this is how the financial aid office determines the student's financial need. And this is how they fill the unmet need. So what you'll need to understand to make sure to explain to students is that the SAI is considered the family's responsibility to cover. This can be a source of stress for many families, as this number is not always reflective of the family's ability to pay, and in most instances is not realistic. So we'll talk about that more in the next slide. But it may seem a bit too early to go in depth about Student Aid Index, but we're going to go into it today. So again, Student Aid Index, SAI, replace the terminology of EFC. The Student Aid Index better reflects the output from the FAFSA as an index, not a reflection of what the family can or will pay. Family size, not household size anymore, will be based on the number of people claimed as exemptions on tax forms filed for the people reported on the FAFSA, and there will be an option to modify that number if it's no longer accurate as a accurate reflection of the family size. So Student Aid Index is no longer to be divided by the number of family members attending college. With the number in college removed on the FAFSA from the formula, many students may have an SAI double or even triple if there was no change in family income. One last piece so that you are not alarmed when you're helping students fill out their FAFSA is that you will see SAIs as low as 1,500. And that allows the neediest students to receive aid in excess of the cost of attendance. So additionally, businesses and farms are now counted as assets when previously they weren't. And another new term is FSS, which is FAFSA Submission Summary, and that replaces the term SAR or Student Aid Report. So
thank you. I couldn't
that's
remember.
all a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
In the next slide, we're going to talk about how to make it better, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the very quick version of what Carrie just showed you is that financial aid offices start with cost of attendance minus SAI is the unmet need. The calculation that students need to make is start with the cost of attendance, reduce any free aid they're receiving from the school. So as Carrie told you, grants and scholarships, right? And the difference is what they're going to be responsible for. That is the quick and dirty formula that we recommend. Now I'm going to skip a lot of formulas to give you an example of what we just showed you so that when you're sitting down with a student and a financial aid award letter, you can do the math correctly. Well, correctly and fast. Hold on, let me do this very quickly. Okay, this is what I wanted to show you. So let's focus on the left-hand side of the screen first. This is how the financial aid offices do the calculation. They start with that cost of attendance that Carrie walked us through. They subtract the student aid index, which is the result of completing a FAFSA or a WASFA. Do remember it's an out-of-pocket expense, right? And then we subtract any grants that the student may have received, grants or scholarships, right? The difference, the unmet need, the student is also responsible for. So here in this calculation, the financial aid office does, it has two items that is an out-of-pocket expense for the student. Pretty much the student is responsible for. It's very difficult for a student to understand that. They normally think that the $1,000 in student aid index is not their responsibility. So that's why at CSF, we recommend you use the formula on the right-hand side of the screen, which is starting with the cost of attendance, subtracting all the grants and scholarships or free money, as we call it, and then the difference is what really the student will have to figure out how to cover. How do we recommend that students cover that? Unfortunately, loans are always in the mix, but it's not the only thing. But also maybe from wages from, you know, a part-time job or some earnings they may have from a summer job, right? So those are all things that students can think about using to cover outside scholarships. That's another great thing, right? That students can use to cover that unmet need. Okay, sorry that we talked so fast, and Carrie already covered the loans, so I'm not going to spend much time on this slide. What we want to do now, so here I'm going to leave this information up so that you know where you can find more information on our financial aid hub, and go to the chat with Carrie to start answering some of those questions you asked us, if that sounds like a good idea.
That sounds wonderful. I'm going to start at
Yeah.
the very top.
Yeah.
So what are the age ranges for homeless youth and unaccompanied minors?
Yeah. So the age ranges for homeless youth and unaccompanied minors really vary depending on the definition of the programs we're talking about, right? So there are many different programs that provide support to students that are experiencing homelessness or that are unaccompanied minors. So in general, they range between the ages of 16 and 21. Let me give you a couple of examples. Runaway youth, the runaway and homeless.
I think she had a glitch with her. I think she's back.
Can you
There
hear
you are. Yeah, I can hear you. You left us for one
Sorry.
second.
Yeah, I don't know
So
what happened.
you were
So, yeah.
saying one example of a program is?
Yeah, it's the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act that defines a runaway youth as someone under the age of 18. So that's one example, right? Then TLP, or Transitional Living Program, defines youth, defines youth of anybody between the age of 16 and 22. So you'll have to look at what programs you're thinking about, or referring the student to determine the different ages.
And then for
Okay.
FAFSA, they would be referring to students under the age of 24.
Correct.
All right, next question. Where does a student with a legal guardian fit into these definitions? Where do foster children fit in? Are they considered unaccompanied minors?
Okay, great question. Okay, so going back to the slide on that we used to go over the definitions. So a student with a legal guardian would be considered independent student. The same thing with an unaccompanied minor. So now the questions, the dependency questions on the FAFSA and the WASFA are a lot more explicit. And so students will be able to say, yes, I'm an unaccompanied minor, or I have a legal guardian, or I don't remember the language exactly, but it's going to give them a temporary or provisional independent status. What that means is that as they're completing the FAFSA for the WASFA, they will not have to provide any contributor information, and they will have to follow up with the financial aid office, where the financial aid office is going to do a one-time verification of this information. What that means is they're not going to have to rehash their independent status year after year. Once that first financial aid office at that school has determined that the student is independent due to being an accompanied minor or having a legal guardian or having been, in the foster care system, they no longer have to do it again, and it can be transferred from institution to institution.
Fantastic. Next question, is there a one-year residency requirement for the Washington College grant?
So it depends what it exactly means. There is the 1 year requirement of living in the state of Washington prior to enrolling in college that I mentioned that Senate.
Lost her again, but the answer is yes, you have to be a resident in Washington State for at least a year in order to receive that grant. I want to say thank you to Vanessa for dropping her link for setup. Maria, we lost you again, but you're back and we can hear you.
I don't know what's happening.
I think it's because of the storm. Yeah, but it's okay. I'm going to keep going through and see what other questions we have. Okay. How does the FAFSA or WASFA apply to students who are emancipated? What documents do they have to provide in order to get aid?
Yeah. So any one of these students that we're talking about, not having contributors, being in legal guardianships, being emancipated, they will check that box in the FAFSA or the WASFA, and then they're going to provide any sort of legal document they have to the financial aid office to demonstrate or to demonstrate their status, right? So usually a legal court order will do. In some instances of a student that is non-foster care or is not in a legal guardianship or emancipated, right? It's an informal arrangement, but the student is estranged from their biological or adopted parents and it's not safe for them to contact them. A letter from the student and any other adult that may be aware and supportive of the student, supportive in the sense of, they're living with me, or it could be a member of the clergy that is aware of the student circumstances. It could be many of you in this call that can do that certification. That would be good documentation for the student to submit to the financial aid office.
Really quick, we are almost at time. This is being recorded. We will send this out. So if you have to leave, we will continue answering questions and you'll have that on the recording that's sent to you. Alrighty. Can an FSA ID be used on the letter for unaccompanied homeless youth in absence of an SSN? So that was while we were going over how to apply for an FSA ID, and that's when this popped up.
I would not do that.
No, so students, when they're filling out their FAFSA, they create their own FSA ID, and then they would put in their social security number. But if they're an unaccompanied homeless youth, there's a spot on there that they'll check off, and it won't ask for their parents' information, and then they'll just provide any information that they need to their school. All right. I have seen student reports with negative 1,500 SAI. Is the negative an indication to subtract?
No, it's an indication of the highest financial need. So Carrie was explaining, was trying to tell you, don't be alarmed if you see an SAI that it's between negative 1,500 and 0. It's pretty much a 0, only that it distinguishes a student that has a 0 versus a minus 1,500. The one with the minus 1,500 means that it has higher need than one with a 0, if that makes any sense. It's students with the highest financial need.
Alrighty. Kelly asked, was the information you provided regarding students under guardianship in place this year? What if a student was guided differently through the process, and it is possible they were misguided and their guardian acted as a contributor even though they were not legally adopted? This happens with kinship providers in our state, especially college-age students.
Okay.
So it sounds like they're living with maybe a brother or sister or an aunt or uncle. But if they have like a dependency court order,
it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Only matters. You only provide information about biological or adopted parents, even if you have a legal guardianship in place. That legal guardian's information does not go into a FAFSA or a WASFA. Just remember, just go back to when you're like, oh, this student is living with blah, blah, blah. Is it a biological or adopted parent? No? Okay, then the student doesn't provide any information about any contributors.
So the question, can that information be found documented somewhere? I'm not sure which information we're referring to. So if you want to follow up, I'd appreciate it. And we
Yeah.
can answer that question for you.
Yeah. About emancipated youth? Yes, it's on the FSA website, but we can also send that information, that link with the email that is going to be sent later in the year. Later in the year, sorry, later in the week.
Let's see, if a student's circumstances have changed from what they reported on FAFSA, can they request a dependency override? Also, can a student receive independent status due to special circumstances during the academic year and have their aid updated accordingly, or must any changes to aid wait until following year? Great question.
Yeah, no, it can be done right away. It does take time, although the Department of Ed has come with new guidance saying that financial aid offices are required to respond to any sort of financial aid or dependency appeal within 90 days. 90 days, that's how long they can take before they respond. It doesn't mean they're going to approve it, but they have 90 days to respond, because in the past, as many of you may have experienced, financial aid offices may take months and months and months, and students don't have months and months to wait before receiving financial aid. So yes.
Can you share the guidance? We are experiencing pushback for a student and was told no changes could be made until next year.
Yes, and I would love to hear more about the pushback. Not to put anybody on blast, and you can email us, separately. What's the institution? What was the process you were trying to start with the school, so that I can provide you with more, more accurate information. Yeah, absolutely. Here's our email address on the screen, if it's still visible to you, scholarshipservices@College Success Foundation. Carrie and I monitor that email address, so that inbox. I hope we didn't go too fast and go too lost along the way. I hope it was somewhat useful. But use us as a resource anytime you need us. We'll do the best we can to help you out.
All right, thank you very much, Maria and Carrie. I went ahead and dropped your email there, the scholarship services at collegesuccessfoundation.org, in the chat to everyone. I also want to put down our contact info in case you have any questions or want to help us connect you with another resource. It's passport@collegesuccessfoundation.org. And then one more thing to share out before we end this webinar. Our next webinar will be on December 11th from 1 to 2 p.m. and the topic will be trauma-informed practices for post-secondary education. Registration is open now. Now we'll drop that link in the chat as well. So on that page, you can register for the next webinar as well as view past recorded webinars. So yeah, if you're wanting to watch this back and go over some of that same information, you can head to that website, the resources webinars page on our WPN website, and get more information. But yeah, thanks again for everyone for joining us today, and big thank you to Maria and Carrie. Lots of good information. Definitely get in touch with them if you have questions, and yeah. Hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you, Elsie and Laura, for having us. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.